Thank you.
I just wanted to start asking a question, sort of from Diego's speech, about the barriers for being an entrepreneur in Latin America. And I think one of the things that is said about Silicon Valley is, you have all of these incredible resources, and one of them is technology. And it goes without saying, that in today's global economy, there has been an evident democratization of technology, as all of you have spoken to. What do you think is the role of technology for generating impactful innovation and entrepreneurship? And to what technological resources, if any, is Latin America not having access to?
That, it's very recent, the fact that, well, to start, I would say that to me the most revolutionary technology of probably humanity ever is computing and the internet on top of computing, right? And it's very recent that, almost everyone in the world, and in Latin America in particular, has access to that. So I remember when I was in high school, I actually had to ask permission to use the internet room, and I would go like once a week. Hopefully I got kind of like a slot to go and use the internet room. And now we have super fast internet in a supercomputer in our pockets, And when I go to Latin America, even in sort of like in low-income areas, I see people with smartphones, having access to all the information in the planet in their pockets. So I think that, and that's a very recent phenomenon in the big picture, and I think that this is gonna change a lot. So I think that all these barriers that we used to have in terms of access to information, access to technologies, they're not there anymore. That's why I was saying that the barrier is more a mental barrier than a technological one.
Do you have anything to add, Santi or Leslie?
I agree that computing is like the single most important thing that happened in the 20th century. The internet on top of that, and now the blockchain.
Okay, my second question is about you've all talked about like startup entrepreneurship and innovation, and I think that's a topic we'll dive into in a bit. But I have just one question about like the corporate world in Latin America. So it has been increasingly said that innovation is becoming a necessity, and that businesses will very soon have to innovate just in order to survive, just to stay competitive. And that's what Diego was saying. You have to think globally today, otherwise you're dead. Yet innovation rates in Latin America are very low, seem very low, if you compare with developed regions. Even when entrepreneurship has peaked, there has been a record number of like people opening businesses in Latin America in the last years. So what is your hypothesis for the low level of innovation, especially at the corporate level, or like at the common people starting entrepreneurships, but they are not startups, they are not innovative? Why do you think that is? Or even big companies, why do you think they don't innovate?
Well, I think more and more they are trying to innovate. Like I have seen that a lot of large companies are like, the reason that they are looking to innovate is to keep up with their customers. And I mean, if everybody has a smartphone in their pocket and has information about everything all over the world, I mean, if the companies are not innovating, then they're going to lose customers, because in a global marketplace, people can buy from all over the world. So I think that, I mean, in any place, there's always a generational shift, and I mean, some people are going to be more interested in change than others, but I do think that in order to like really be able to capture the imagination of the new generations, they need to innovate. And from what I've seen, many large companies have put some effort into innovating and trying to bring new products, new services, new technologies into their offerings.
When I in my previous life, before going into the dark side of politics, I had a startup with venture capital from Brazil, and I was able to witness a lot of the innovation happening in Latin America. And there's a huge challenge of developing the markets. Like certainly, smartphone penetration is like a great opportunity looking at the future of Latin America. and having more and more entrepreneurs, one generation after the other, willing to take the risks in a very risk-averse region, and not just from the financial analysis, but also from the cultural point of view. Risk takers everyone is waiting for you to fail, and that's the opposite of Silicon Valley, where failure is desired as a iterative process towards whatever your success will end up being. So the cultural challenge is very big, and I think that what I found interesting of the Latin American context is innovating in the space of that you won't be finding much of this happening probably in the developed nations that has to do with politics. Latin America is a very fertile ground actually for civic technology. I found that because of the way we were working with activists in the region. And this was something noted to me that I talked with the founder of the Pirate Party in Sweden, and he said to me, he asked me, do you know why the Pirate Party appeared in Sweden before than anywhere else? I said, no, I had no idea. Why Sweden? And he says that in Sweden, the installation of fiber optic has been a thing done through the state, not done through private telecommunication corporations, but it was a state government-driven decision to do part of the commons, the installation of fiber optics. And that led to a kind of innovation in Sweden of merging politics and technology in the concept of the Pirate Party. And then there's the whole idea of Pirate Bay and all that case. That's an entirely different chapter, but has to do with what does the context of Latin America has that it's entirely different than other places. And I think you look, Latin America is a troubled region with, swinging from the left to the right with a lot of crisis, and people are very passionate about politics. And I think that for my experience at least, that's where I've seen that's in the DNA of Latin America, these kinds of innovations can play out very well. But these are innovations that are not in the standard venture capital business-driven decisions. Those happen a lot, and it's growing. But what Latin America has as an opportunity that is different from anywhere else in the world, I tend to suspect there's something around there. I'm not 100% sure, though.
Thank you. So my next question is about something that characterizes all of you. You're traveling, innovating, dropping out of school, not following traditional career paths, among other things, seem to characterize all of you and successful entrepreneurs in general. But some would say, this is a very silly thing to do. It's a very risky thing to do. And I was just wondering, how did you overcome the common belief that one shouldn't, take that risk? We should only do traditional paths. We should try to strive towards that. How did you overcome that? And more importantly, what would you say to young Latin American leaders that are struggling with overcoming that?
Well, the other day I met a guy that is not a college dropout. He was a high school dropout, and he's Argentinian, and he came to Silicon Valley when he was 17. It's I like. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs and all the great makers of Silicon Valley, and these guys that were able to pull this whole personal computing revolution. And I think that, at least in something I can relate with, is something that he said in his famous Stanford speech about instinct, saying that instinct is this voice that comes from the future that already knows what you want. And I think that when you make a decision that it's such a black sheep decision of not going through the traditional path of college education and finding an easy a job at a large company, is usually because you are pulled by some kind of instinct or some kind of curiosity that is taking you to explore this thing you cannot sleep without. And entrepreneurship to me is like a lifestyle. It's constantly having this little problem in the back of your mind that in every moment that you do not have to pay attention to real life, then you go back to this problem in the back of your mind trying to figure out. And it's either building a company, figuring out a product, doing a piece of technology. but it's something. It's like an inevitable thing that it's driven by your instinct and your curiosity. And I think that those things happen, like happened to Diego. Diego having a computer in Tucumán. It's like the seed. Computing and the internet is this. I also had I was the first among my classroom to have a computer and to learn programming and to get connected to the internet. And it's like the rabbit hole of Alice in Wonderland. And I think developing that instinct, the muscle of your instinct, certainly will take you to interesting places.
Yeah, that's great. I agree, and in my case in particular, it was when I was sort of like in college. I actually, had a job during college at an energy company, and I remember, looking at some people that had worked in that company for 25 years. They were probably ending their career in that company, and I remember looking at them and saying like, imagining sort of like when I am at the end of my career, at the end of my life, what do I want? Do I want to have had sort of like a successful, professional career, or I want to have had a diverse set of experiences and hopefully made something, useful for the world. And that part sounded more appealing. And even though, I in certain decisions I had to make, dropping things and, taking sort of like a risky path, sometimes you feel fear because it's something new, you can fail. I think the drive for having a life that was more interesting and more impactful, was stronger. And now I actually use it every time that I am in front of a decision. If one feels more risky and more, I feel more fear towards that option, probably that's the right path. And I think that is a muscle that you exercise over time, I think.
Leslie? Any comments?
So I have also made a lot of choices that other people might see as risky. I mean, moving to China with a Latin American Studies degree kind of set the stage for many other things. Working for lots of different startups, working with many different entrepreneurs over time. I do come from a family of entrepreneurs. My brother has an electric skateboard company. My parents have started several companies over the years, including one more recently that's a jewelry company where they source from Africa. They were in startup Chile. Kind of interesting. So it's definitely in my blood, and I'm very lucky to have their support in all of these sort of like international entrepreneurial endeavors. I think that one thing that's important that I to this day struggle with is being able to kind of like tell your own story and be able to explain your own path to other people. Because I think that no one's really going to connect the dots for you, especially if you make unusual choices. But you, with the internet and with like the opportunity to kind of create your own platform, you can kind of like connect the dots in the eyes of other people. And you have a lot of opportunities to really shape the way people see you and to shape your next opportunities. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities there. And I mean, even people who like choose to do something that seems stable. I mean, the economy is in such flux that I don't think that there's any choice that I could have made graduating from this fine university in 2006 where I would be working at the same company for all of these years. I just can't even imagine that. I don't even know what company didn't go completely bust in like 2009. Like, it's just difficult for me to imagine stability. I'm just not really familiar with it. And I think things are always changing. There's always new opportunities out there, and it's all about being able to find your own support networks and being able to kind of like chart your own course and your own story.
Thank you. The next question I want to ask is sort of a bit more about like policymakers and people in power in Latin America and how can they relate to these ideas. So in general, policymakers and people in power in Latin America claim to embrace innovation generally, especially recently, and especially in countries like Mexico or Chile that are like rapidly industrializing, or Brazil. Yet they don't seem to embrace the chaos that innovation, comes with. They rather seem to be threatened, and they feel uncomfortable with the idea of radical change in markets, politics, and they feel, or the media. So my question is, how can we expose the contradiction in their discourses, the apparent contradiction, and foster a climate of radical competition, change and information transparency that allows for what I think is true innovation. And I think that's a common thing that you've all had in your presentations.
Our politician friend can maybe speak first.
Yeah, I was afraid that you were going to throw that to me. I think the conservative approach of venture capitalists in Latin America is a counterbalance to the intrinsic chaotic nature of government and politics in the region in general. Even though the region has shown that in the last 30 years has been able to develop somewhat stable democracies throughout pretty much all of the countries, and that's a huge step forwards. And the thing with politics is that it moves at glacial speeds. Politics requires one generation to move until the next generation appears, and it's very long processes. And that said, I think that there's a famous economist of the 19th century called Karl Marx that said, capital has no nation. So if you are thinking in global terms, if you are thinking in developing an innovation, at least when I'm in Argentina and I talk to fellow entrepreneurs in Argentina, I always encourage to, whatever they're working on, look at the world. The world is your home, not doing something for necessarily intrinsic for the local. You can start locally, obviously, and it's if I look at my experience with the Net Party, and even though it's politics and we were doing Democracy OS, we knew that we wanted a local impact, obviously, because we were running for Congress and everything, but by having that strong, powerful local impact, the entire doors of the world opened to us. And we ended up visiting a lot of countries in Europe, a lot of countries in the entire American continent, because of that local case that we were able to build. So that thing of, that cliche of act local, think global, I think it's actually a good insight. And I think entrepreneurs don't need to be scared or fearful of the economic context or the local context, because those things come up and down all the time. Focus on the fundamentals, and yeah, the world is your home. I think you have to, developing a global mindset is one of the things that Latin America needs to do more, and I think new generations get it.
I kind of agree with that. I think that, this new revolution I was mentioning earlier, it's also, like, for example, today from anywhere in the world you can incorporate a company in Delaware, you can incorporate a company in Estonia, through, the web. So you could, have, today you can have virtually a virtual company in other place serving customers in the US, with a company incorporated in another country. So I think, like the role of governments probably is going to become less relevant. I do hope that governments get better in Latin America, because of, the importance for the population in general. But I think for entrepreneurs in particular, I think it's becoming less relevant because of technology.
And technology gives you the potential to be global. And so just as, agreeing with both of you, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to look beyond local politics and really think internationally. I also think, though, when thinking about entrepreneurship and innovation, like Schumpeter wrote, this is creative destruction. I don't think any politician is going to vote for, yes, we want creative destruction. that doesn't make sense in terms of the incentives that would keep somebody in power. So I think that it really depends on sort of the macroeconomic changes. And when it comes to something like an economy that's dominated by specific commodities, like in Chile, copper is the main engine of the economy. There are changes happening in terms of industry in the world where they're creating alternatives to copper. And one thing that forward-thinking politicians are saying is well, what if no one needs copper? What are we going to do in this country? And that big picture focus on need for new sources of income is really what propels all of this investment from the public sector in all sorts of different innovative projects. And I don't think that that's enough, but I do think that there's a lot of potential for the government to play a positive role in this as well, in terms of encouraging people on a local level, and also in terms of responding to the big macroeconomic changes that are like changing the shape of an economy.
Thank you very much. Those were brilliant responses. And now we're going to open the microphone for anyone that has any questions in the public.
Before anything, thanks a lot for the presentations. Even though I didn't get the beginning of the first one, I'm sorry. I really enjoyed it. Like since we're law school, I guess you were expecting, most of us lawyers are studying. I'm a lawyer in Latin America, and I'm always wondering, with my work with entrepreneurs over there, what are the legal barriers that in your experience, are preventing innovation? What I'm most concerned about, because you mentioned it's really easy to incorporate in different countries, but to access capital. So I've been wondering, like, there's so many legal barriers in my country, in Colombia, to let entrepreneurs access capital. From your experience, what are the solutions that we could think about?
The first thing that comes to my mind is the cost of actually incorporating. Incorporating in Latin America, in all of our countries, takes from 1 month to 6 months, a lot of paperwork, a lot of lawyers. And then the risk of hiring people, for example, in a country like Argentina, it adds a lot of liabilities to the company doing the hiring, and then tax-wise is also very painful, especially if you are not profitable the first years. So I think that there are, like Chile did some interesting initiatives of letting you incorporate in 1 day, and they have this program where you can incorporate very fast. And all that work that the entrepreneur wants it to keep it at the minimum possible. It's never it never fades away. It's always there, and it's a responsibility to take care of all that. But making those processes more efficient, and getting the entrepreneur to put as much bandwidth of his attention to innovating, to building, generating value, to figuring, rather than fighting the system and having the system work with him, that could be a good game changer, and that requires the political will of governments and policy makers to deal with that.
Yeah, I would add, from a legal perspective, I think something that's terrible, at least in Argentina, I don't know the rest of the countries, is that if you fail in a company, you can actually not start a company for a long time. If you go bankruptcy, you're not legally allowed to start a new business. That's terrible, because failure is part of what you need to succeed, to innovate, as we were talking. And then the second part, I remember the first time I raised capital here in the US, and it was just, I sent a document via DocuSign, and then, the guy, signed, online, and then I, gave my wire transfer information. He transferred money to my bank account. And it was like, wow, And in Latin America, you have to go to the notary, and there's like this big contract. You have to sign every page. It's like, from a lawyer's perspective, I think that, making linear, agreements between, capital and entrepreneurs, be super helpful. I think now certain, venture capitals or accelerators in Latin America are starting to adopt the documents of Silicon Valley, like convertible notes and safe documents and so forth. But I think that is definitely also something that will help.
Anyone else has a question?
Thank you. I want to get y'all's perspective on how can entrepreneurs in the region both encourage governments and on their own to get young people and children access to the technology and the education they need to innovate, because all of you talked about either having early access to computers or being able to study somewhere, but that's not the reality for the vast majority of the people that live in the region. So what can you do on both fronts to make that happen?
I can jump quickly on that. There have been some programs inspired by MIT's One Laptop Per Child program in the region. Uruguay, Colombia, Argentina, as far as I know, implemented versions of that program where they distribute laptops to students, to elementary school students. Each kid gets one laptop. In Argentina, I've seen 5 million laptops distributed. And those programs help to lower the gap of digital access. And actually, when you look closely at the statistics, and I know this very well because of our work with the Net Party, in a city like Buenos Aires, 75% of the homes get internet access. So it's a very highly connected society. And specifically, even though there's a digital gap between the younger generation, those who are less than 30 years old, 98% access social media at least once a week. 93% access social media at least once a week. 100% access the internet of under 30-year-olds in a city like Buenos Aires that has some very big slums. And when I read that statistic for the first time, I thought, oh, but this cannot be true. You think that there's a bigger digital divide, but when I visited the slums of Buenos Aires, I found all the teenagers, the 21-year-old, 25, with huge phones because phones became extremely accessible. Now, the challenge is it's not just getting the phone because it makes you look cool. It's understanding that that tool that you have in your hands can unleash your creativity in many, many ways. To me, the core is teaching programming. And I'm going to do an analogy with what happened with the printing press. Before the printing press, only the powerful knew how to read and write. Some monks in their monasteries and they were able to read and write the Bible and speak the sacred word, and the rest of the population were kept ignorant of this mystical knowledge of reading and writing, until the printing press appeared, and then everyone knows how to read and write when they are 6 years old. So with programming, it's pretty much the same. Today, programming is knowledge of the powerful. I think that we need to take advantage of these programs that are distributing laptops and connecting our society, especially in the younger generations, to get those kids to learn coding. Because if they're able to learn coding, they're learning a new language that is going to structure their mind, their logical way of figuring out problems. But even more than that, they're going to have an incredible, powerful tool to generate any kind of machine that they can dream of, because computers are universal machines. They are machines that can be transformed into any kind of machine depending on the code that you put into them. And if you are able to code, then you are your future looks very interesting. So I'm teach kids to code.
I have a quick follow-up on that, Santi. I was just thinking about the fact that, for example, Diego said that the technical capacity is there, but we're not using it. So in a sense, I would ask, is it really the coding, or is it more sort of, should we change something more fundamental in our educational systems in Latin America? Is there something beyond, pure, technical skills or whatever? Because I think we have great engineers. I think, you could put them with MAT kids and they would do better in math or coding, and I think that's true. But isn't there something else? Isn't there something, and I think you've talked about it, is there, that passion or that curiosity and that creativity and that, drive, isn't that something that, you get from education? And most people get that, from their parents, Leslie having, a household of, entrepreneurial parents. Do you think there's an educational component that's beyond?
The best teacher you can have in your life is yourself. So if you're able to let kids know that they can teach themselves to learn more and plant that in kids. I have a friend in Buenos Aires. He's a teacher, a great, he's all about education. And he goes to classes in the slums of Buenos Aires to teach kids how to use their computers. And all he does is ask them questions that are very hard to answer, but he just throws out the question. One question is, for example, when did the first war in human civilization happen? There's no clear answer to that, but you throw that into the kids and the kids start Googling, they go into Wikipedia. It's just, you have to develop your curiosity and make this capability of wanting to be fed more and more knowledge, more and more information. It's up to you to develop it. It's up to you to go to the gym or to do keep a healthy life. So I think teachers are very important to inspire that in kids, not feed them traditional content, but inspire their curiosity, I think.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question.
Hi, I had a question for Santi. How do you ensure that every user on democracy.os is unique and there are no duplicate users? Because I thought like it's a really cool concept, like when you have people voting for stuff, but how do you ensure that none of it is fake or somebody doesn't hack the system?
Yeah, I tried to hack Democracy OS many times when the party did some sensitive voting, and yes, it can be hacked with multiple identities. It's a big problem. So what differentiates a survey or polling from an election, a proper election, is two things. Proper identity validation, and identity validation is a massive information technology problem still. Today, for example, all of us use Facebook Connect to log into applications. That means that Facebook at any time, at any moment, can impersonate us. We are not really owners of our identity, Facebook is. So how you do decentralized identity validation, massive problem. Some companies here in the Bay Area are working around that with the blockchain. I think the blockchain has one key for that, but it requires training of the user to understand how to protect your own data, how to protect your own information, and improve the user experience. So that's a massive problem. We haven't figured it out, but I'm deeply concerned about proper identity validation that's not controlled by either Facebook or Google. Big problem. Today, you can use Facebook validation, and if it's not something very serious, like that's a good check. And also you can check email domains. There are many, many techniques, but it's a big one. So yeah, it's working on it.
I think we have, one more question.
Hi. Santi and all of you touched on, how complex our societies are, and I like how Santi you touched on the civil culture, la cultura ciudadana, ¿no? And I wonder, because in Latin America we have a problem that a lot of other places have in less degrees, which is the component of also violence, right? Countries like Honduras, Colombia, or my own Venezuela. How can technology or like an entrepreneurial solution to this problem that we've had for all of our history? So how can technology participate on this?
To address violence. So I know that there have been a lot of different apps that have been created about like reporting incidents. And I don't know if that necessarily solves the problem, but I know that there's like a big sort of like civic hacking movement here in the US where trying to use, police data and transit data and all kinds of things to provide better information to people. I think that it's definitely a huge problem and not an easy problem to solve. And the greatest entrepreneurial technological minds should be addressing the biggest problems in society, like violence, like corruption, like things like that. So I think I don't really have an answer, but I do know that some people in various cities have been focusing on how to use technology and innovation to at least provide better information to people around violence.
But, we were talking about when we were coming here that now everyone has a super camera here connected to the internet, and there's so many instances of people filming police violence, for example, in Argentina, in Latin America, in the US as well. And I think this is going to change the game, when everyone can actually in real time report, acts of violence, acts of corruption. I think it's really game changing. The transparency that you get in places where you didn't get, any information whatsoever in the past. For example, there's an instance in my province in Tucumán. There was a flood, and then the wife of the governor came, and everyone was complaining to her, why the government wasn't helping, and then she went crazy and she started sort of like saying crazy things to people, saying like, yeah, you go, like poor people, I don't want to see you, and then somebody was filming and then put it on YouTube and now has millions of views, and it was a big problem for the government of the province, So I think this this is a way in which technology is going to reduce violence, or at least have an impact.
Yeah, it's the great question of good versus evil, light versus dark. And if you go to the very origins of computing, it's the story of this mathematician in England that used this brute force mechanism to disencrypt the Enigma machine of the Nazis, Alan Turing. And to me, that's the ultimate good versus evil story. The counter effect of violence is intelligence, is information, is knowledge. That's light. And I think that I'm very optimistic about the internet and its force on the world. Today, we have seen in the last 20 years the internet transform media and culture, but we all know that the internet runs on this incredible piece of hardware we call computers. And it's a matter of time that the internet is going to evolve beyond media and culture. That's an already won battle by the internet. And it's going to transform what we understand of institutions, the way we build institutions, the way we organize as human society, the way we govern ourselves and we develop our political rights and our financial rights. That's the internet that's coming. That's why I'm saying that the blockchain is like a huge deal, because it has to do with actually having the tool to make that happen. So violence is ignorance, and ignorance can only be fought with knowledge. And I'm extremely optimistic about, I think it should be the priority of every government, a digital agenda, because the digital agenda means the education agenda, and means education means reducing violence. And that's why I'm doing politics with these kind of ideas.
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap up our panel right now, but before we do, we have some gifts for speakers. All right, so I thought you were... So I don't know who this is.
This is incredible, guys. Who did this? This is a masterpiece. Like me, this is the first thing I have in my home. It's great.
We want to thank Álvaro, the artist, for making them. Gracias.